Hola a tots els que ens esteu escoltant, benvinguts. Soc Josep María Torra i us parlo en nom de la Junta Directiva de la demarcació de Girona del Col·legi d'Arquitectes de Catalunya. Em plau molt, estic molt content de poder presentar les converses que venen a continuació i que formen part del cicle que hem dedicat a exposar fotografies que han fet arquitectes. Un cicle que hem anomenat l'àlbum de l'arquitecte, que varen començar ja fa ben bé un parell d'anys, amb l'intermedi que ha suposat la pandèmia, amb una exposició dedicada al viatge que l'any 1909 va fer Cicle travessant Europa i fins al sud d'Itàlia. Aquesta va ser la primera exposició del cicle. La segona la varen dedicar a l'arquitecte i fotògraf destacat Leonardo Finotti, que ens va oferir una visió de Rio de Janeiro, una visió singular, una visió no gens convencional, una visió sumament interessant. La tercera exposició va ser la dedicada a la Clara Pardo, una fotògrafa i arquitecta gironina, ens va mostrar de les seves visualitzacions d'allò que ella va veure en diversos viatges al llarg de la Índia. I la quarta va ser un petit parèntesi i la vam dedicar a fer, ja que s'esqueia, commemoràvem el centenari de la fundació del Bauhaus, la vàrem dedicar a revisar la fotografia i el que ell anomenava fotogrames de Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, que, com deveu saber, fou un dels professors més destacats d'aquella escola. I aquesta cinquena exposició, que ara es troba en curs, i de la qual les converses que venen a continuació són vinculades, la dediquem a Denise Scott Brown. Denise Scott Brown, la sòcia de Robert Venturi, arquitecte destacadíssim i enormement influent en les darreries del segle XX, doncs Denise, durant una bona part de la seva trajectòria, va anar fent fotos dels seus viatges a Sud-àfrica, a la seva Sud-àfrica natal, per Itàlia, per l'antiga Iugoslàvia, per Estats Units, per descomptat, i a nombroses ciutats dels Estats Units, entre elles Las Vegas, naturalment, doncs va anar fent unes fotos que després va fer servir per, diguem-ne, recolzar les seves propostes teòriques expressades sobretot en el llibre tan influent que fou el Learning from Las Vegas. Espero, per tant, que aquestes converses que venen a continuació, com dic, vinculades a l'arquitecta Denise Scott Brown, siguin del vostre interès i, per la meva part, no tinc res més a dir, deixo la paraula a Maria Pia Fontana, que us presentarà amb més extensió aquesta activitat. Moltes gràcies.
Okay, so good afternoon and welcome. Today we begin the first session of the cycle Learning from Denise, associated with the exhibition Traveling with Denise, a collection of photographs of the American architect where she tells her way of seeing the city, the context, and urban life. Denise Scott Brown has repeated on many occasions that for her, travel and photography are instruments for learning and for projecting. They are tools that serve to understand the experience and everyday life, sometimes to reflect and transform them into project input. The exhibition will be open at the Architectural Association COAC in Girona until the end of June, so we invite you to come and see it. It is also important to remember that this cycle of talks and the exhibition of Denise photographs are part of the cycle The Architect's Album, where the COAC's cultural department and especially Josep María Torra as coordinator of the cycle have tried to focus attention on the role of photography as a way of seeing the city and architecture, as an operational instrument of synthesis and interpretation of reality, and as a practical tool for planning. The cycle Learning from Denise that we present today is composed of 4 sessions, where in each case we will invite 2 or 3 speakers who, based on their own reflections, will generate a mutual dialogue on the same topic. Like, for example, travel and photography in this first session of today, the gender gaze in the second session, where we will create a dialogue between Denise Scott Brown, Lina Bobardi, and Lily Reich from the end of expert researchers on the subject, Pedagogy and Campus, focusing on the didactics approach of Denise and the University Campus project that she developed mainly in the United States in the third session, and to finish with a comparative look at the relationship between street and architecture, taking up a very important theme for Denise Scott Brown, who emphasized the importance of the interscalar approach and the transversal relationship between building and city, between architecture and urbanism. I want to talk to COAC Girona, the president Marchi Riera, Silvia Muschera, Francesc Caro, and especially Josep María Torra for their confidence in my role as co-curator of the exhibition and as organizer of this series of talks. Without further ado, I will introduce today two guests who have the honor of inaugurating the series, Jeremy Tenenbaum and Carolina Vaccaro. Before introducing them, I would like to comment that at this moment, in parallel to the exhibition in Girona, there is also another exhibition in Philadelphia, curated by Carolina Vaccaro, and which is counted with Jeremy's collaboration, entitled Denise Scott Brown, Learning to See. A happy coincidence which confirms once again the relevance and validity of Denise Scott Brown's teachings. Next. So now I will introduce a short presentation of our guest speaker, Jeremy Eric Tenenbaum, Director of Marketing and Graphics. Jeremy is a designer, graphic designer, artist, and writer. He has led and contributed to numerous exhibition and art installation projects from museum, cultural, academic, and commercial clients. As a member of Denise Scott Brown and Associated and VSBA Architect and Planners, he has led marketing and public relations while contributing to many architectural projects and has contributed to VSBA planning, collaborating in projects and proposals. Jeremy has designed the museum and gallery exhibition around the world. He created the downtown Denise Scott Brown Major retrospective exhibition for the Architekturzentrum in Vienna, Austria. He managed design of the Wayward Eye photography exhibition at the Venice Biennale, designed a traveling exhibition in Spain, contributing to a travel exhibition in Amsterdam, and contributed to an exhibition at Temple University Tyler School of Arts. As a publication designer, Jeremy has written and designed the Intergrund 56 guidebook for downtown Denise Scott Brown, and he designed the jacket for a facsimile of Learning from Las Vegas, first edition, and has created the graphics for many publications, articles, posters, videos, advertisement, and other print and web productions. As a visual artist, Jeremy has shown his illustrated work, photography, clients and advertisements, branding and websites. And now, finally, he works independently with commercial and institutional clients to advertisement, branding and websites, and is working with the Neon Museum of Philadelphia to strategically organize and manage the growing institution. So thank you, Jeremy, to stay here. Now I will present Carolina Vaccaro. She's an architect, practicing architect in Rome. She graduated in architecture at the University of Rome La Sapienza in 1983, and she has a PhD in architecture and architecture design. Teaching at the University of Rome La Sapienza, University of Roma 3, Temple University, Rome Campus, Northeastern University, Iowa, State University, and lecturing in several universities in Italy and abroad. Carolina Vaccaro has won prizes in a number of competitions. Her works has been shown in several exhibitions, including the Biennale of Venice, the Rome Fair, and the Triennale of Milan. She worked in the 80s in the office of Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown in Philadelphia, and she is the author of 3 books. Venturi, Scott Brown e Associati, Zanichelli Press, Nel disegno, Clean Press, and Maniera del Moderno, La Terza Press. She published essays in numerous magazines, including Casavella, Domus, and University Press. Currently, she is, as you said before, the scientific curator and designer of the exhibition Denise Scott Brown, Learning to See, in the Temple University Tyler School of Architecture and Architecture, scheduled to open in May 2021 in Philadelphia. Therefore, we begin with the first presentation by Jeremy Tenenbaum, followed by Carolina Vaccaro. So for this occasion, we have decided to propose a dynamic conversational format where each of the speakers will present a first reflection to give way to a series of new approaches through a reciprocal debate. So Jeremy, you can start, and after we can listen to Carolina. Thank you.
Hello. I am not an architect. I'm a poet. But for many years, I've worked with Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi because they need poets as much as architects. They need people that can appreciate both the ugly and ordinary as well as the heroic and the original, both and. I'm about to show you some photographs that you may have seen before. My hope is to show a slightly different way of looking at Denise's photographs and a slightly different way of looking at Denise Scott Brown, along with my own ethical, artistic, personal understanding of what Denise has taught me. Denise has a wayward eye that she appreciates. She does her best to see the world around her with a fresh, sometimes innocent eye, and this is difficult. She grew up in South Africa in the 1930s and 40s, and she attempted to learn from the vernacular world around her, from both her Jewish community and her English background and the life of Africa around her. Here we see a photograph that she took in near Johannesburg in the 1950s as she began to turn her camera to simply the world around her. This brings up the question, why does Denise Scott Brown take photographs? One reason that she takes photographs is for record keeping, for analysis, for understanding, as I say, the world around her. In this slide, we see that she's photographing the Mampak tribe of South Africa as she both understands their way of life, but understands how they create constructions based, to some degree, on appropriations and representations of Western imagery, such as Gillette razor blades that create the patterns in the walls that you see. As she traveled, she documented the world around her so that she could use those photographs for teaching, for architectural practice later, so that she could understand housing, as she does here, and architecture in general. When she went to Venice with her first husband, Robert Scott Brown, they again documented their travels, but they also took unapologetically glamour shots, simply beautiful, beautiful images of the places that they went to. At the same time, she begins to study systems and patterns, urban systems, forms such as vast spaces like here in Venice, the Piazza San Marco, as she understands how people use the space, as she understands how birds use the space. How do pigeons use the Piazza San Marco? What are their patterns? Elsewhere in Venice, she photographed the lagoon as she began to explore ideas of both vast space and intimate space. The very wide view of large spaces, but also the worm's eye view of intimate areas. Here we see an exploration of vast space in her photography of the Mojave Desert as she went to America and began to teach on the West Coast and began to explore Southern California. Again, ideas about vast space, but also intimate space. Denise traveled by bus. She did not drive. And she walked streets and she saw storefronts and she began to understand urban systems from that perspective. Here we see a photograph that she's taken of Venice Beach. She thinks about those surfboards like totems, and she sees them in iconographic ways as symbols, as well as incredibly functional, playful, recreational items of the people that use Venice Beach. Again, this is simply a beautiful shot with beautiful colors and beautiful systems at play. When she went to the East Coast and lived in Philadelphia, she began to explore Philadelphia and New Jersey and other East Coast environments. Here's a photograph of Atlantic City, and you can see her love of both the urban systems of the boardwalk, as well as the incredible amount of communication that adorns the boardwalk. She's always had a great love of photographing communication systems, and she and Bob and the office would go on to incorporate communication systems in a lot of their architecture, of course. They also began to play a game, she and Bob Venturi. I can name something uglier than you can and love it. Here we see the vernacular, but we also see some things that other architects might consider ugly or too ordinary to pay attention to or to care about. And here she is training her aesthetic eye to both understand why these systems exist and to find an appreciation for them. Here she is showing industrial romance on the Philadelphia side of the, actually across from the Philadelphia side of the Delaware River, as she is watching the good ship Lollipop go up and down the Delaware River. She's always had an incredible love of industrial romance, in Philadelphia as a post-industrial one-time manufacturing center has quite a lot of these civic forms that she loved to photograph. She also photographed, again, housing, even in Philadelphia, as she began to do studies and planning projects in which she explored the ordinary vernacular of the urban landscape. These are simply very common ordinary row homes in Philadelphia, some with adornments, some with slight differences, but the row home is a common typology of housing in Philadelphia, and she studied it. Another planning study or planning exercise that she did was with students, in which she asked, what is the function of a table? How can we understand functionality and broaden our understanding of functionality by taking something extremely common and asking, but how does it really get used? So she and her students took a series of photographs in which the table could be thought of as a throne, or could be thought of as something you dance on top of, or something that children might convert into a boat. All very different ways, but again, the photography allows documentation of this exploratory process. Of course, the most famous study that she and Bob and the office perhaps conducted was Learning from Las Vegas, in which they returned to Las Vegas, a place that she introduced Bob Venturi to, and began to understand its incredible myriad of systems. Here we're looking at just an incredible assembly of signs and urban systems and circulation systems along the strip in Las Vegas. Again, one could ask, can we love this? How do we love this? This is my question as I look at it as a poet. How can this be lovable? And why did it come to be? And can we love it because it's so functional to the people that are using it? Is it a cacophony? Denise says, no, it's not a cacophony. You can find what you're looking for. If you're looking for a motel or a gas station, your eye will pick it out. You can use this environment. Here we see Las Vegas at dusk. Denise loved to photograph Las Vegas, yes by day, yes by night, but especially right now at dusk, where you could read the lights of the signs, but the forms of the buildings begin to become shadowed. Again, it's her romantic eye, but also her eye looking for different systems as they combine and juxtapose. At night, of course, the forms drop away altogether, and you see the signs floating in space. As Bob Venturi would say, form in space, symbol in space over form in space. The idea that the communication floats free of the forms that embody it. And again, there's an exploration of system, but also of beauty. So after all of this, let's talk about how Denise and Bob were mannerists. They would not call themselves postmodernists. They would say that a mannerist is someone who understands the systems, but understands that you can't obey all the rules all the times. And so there has to be a way of understanding when to break the rules and how to break the rules. And when these rules break and you guide how they break, you're a mannerist. You're steering this complex process. And part of that is loving how systems come together and juxtapose and conflict with one another. Here we see a photograph of Philadelphia, and look at the beautiful sense of conflicting scales, the little red building and the large gray and white buildings, the little red signage against the broader forms and symbols of the buildings. Look at this juxtaposition in Monterey, California, of the trailer homes and cars in front of this beautiful Victorian, slightly spooky house. The systems don't necessarily have to resolve. They can live next to each other. They contend, they push against each other, and they create this beautiful tension that is not explained away. Here we see systems that remain mysteries. This is a view of a Southern California scene that Denise simply loves. I've asked her why she loves it, and she says, I don't know, but what could be going on there? Who are the girls wearing pink? Who are the girls wearing blue? What is the nature of the building behind it? How are all of these things coming together? What's the story here? And sometimes, for Denise, the exciting thing is to take the photograph, even when you don't understand what the photograph is showing or exactly the systems at work. You might understand later. You might never understand. But the important thing is to get the photograph now while you can, which is why she says, just shoot, just take. Grab that photograph before you understand why you want that photograph and before the scene changes. And Denise continues to explore even in her old age. She continues, as in our earliest photos in this presentation, to photograph herself, to study herself as she ages, but also to photograph those around her, like her dog Alto, to photograph the beauty of the floral scenes in her dressing room. She continues to explore, to wonder what her camera can be used for. And lastly, this is a photograph of Bob Venturi she took in Las Vegas when he took a very famous photograph of her standing as a scale figure against the skyline. And here she has Bob turn away like a Magritte painting. And of course, this is beautiful and playful. They were just playing. They were two young architects playing in the desert. And of course, it's sad because it memorializes Bob, who we miss very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Sí, yes, Carolina.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. As usual, so brilliant, because you are a poet. You are not an architect. That's the reason.
I'm not even sure if I'm a poet. I'm a talker.
You are a poet who works with architects. You know, that's
Yeah.
And so that's so fluid, so beautiful. It's like, you know, really a story. But you know, I know the teams you're speaking about, but you express them in such a, you know, also intimate way that I appreciate very much. What I can say, you know, among these images, the one that really always impressed me, first of all, is what is the function of a table? Because I am an architect, and so, you know, this really is the symbol of you know, a very important question and topic that we are facing today. You know, how to let an element have more than one function, you know, in general. And in this sense, as an example, just to be concrete, I'm thinking about for the Gordon Hoo Hall project in Princeton, about the stairs that go from the ground floor to the upper floor. That is a stair, but is also a place, you know, as Piazza di Spagna in Rome, you know. So, and you understand, you know, in general, you understand how, you know, all these solution, all these thought that are in a way symbolized also through very elemental symbolic image come from a legacy, from you know, something that belongs in continuity with history, that belongs to a long story that we all know. And then, you know, I like to consider her outsider view, as we can say. You know, the fact that you say the outsider view is also the fact that she shoots immediately even without thinking too much and without even understanding why. And this gives, the possibility after to reconnect, to have a circular vision of some elements. And I'm thinking about her traveling among 3 continents, Africa, Europe, America, and the possibility to have, a really wider vision of topics that the 3 continents share together frequently. So this is my comment.
May I respond to that?
Yes, sure.
So I think her experience did teach, obviously, a tremendous amount, but it's her innocence in a way, her willful innocence, and I don't mean ignorance. Innocence has nothing to do with ignorance. It's keeping a very open mind, but in a way, you asked, how do we create the additional functionality of a table, or how do we allow for that? And of course, children don't need it to be allowed for them. They do it automatically. And that's why I think many of those scenes that we saw were essentially children playing as king or playing in a boat, because children will utilize the furniture of the adult world in the way that they need to. Which is not to say that children know everything, but Denise understands that they have a way of, they don't quite know what the proper way to use the table is yet. That's a sort of imposition that we all come to learn, and that there's a way of changing that perspective. But also it changes over time. Different people need that table for different things over time. And Denise and Bob were famous for saying that the piazzas or the not just piazzas, but various large flexible homes in Europe are able to be used for many purposes over time, the same way that large flexible loft forms in America can. The whole point is that if you go in with a very prescribed narrow view, you'll create barriers to flexibility and change. You can stop a child from using a table as a boat if you screw it into the floor, and then it can't be a boat anymore. Or you can create a building that can't be changed again. And I think that they wanted to maintain a more open, flexible view to allow different functionality.
Yeah, I absolutely, yes. To future use, future use of the space. This is you never need, or you never must lock a project, but leave it open to the possibility to have its own life, its own life with other lives and so on. But what you were saying, let me think also about something that was mentioned today, this morning, in the lecture by Gilles Clement. They ask him, which are the main attitude, the main spirit when you make these photographs, and which are your process and so on. And he answered, I have the observation process, but then I have the wonder, So, and I think, this is something so similar in a way on what Denise, Denise doesn't make photo of architecture only, she makes any photo, but then, these are all, I think, tied together in really a unique thought in a way, and this is the great thing that you can see it in like a panorama, panorama in the sense of something that is fluid, is continuous, and this is also something that I think is very so important. Linking things.
Absolutely. Can I say one last thing, because I meant to say it during my presentation, and I think it's very important to mention. I think it leads to very good conversation, although we don't need to talk about it too much now. Denise has said, no one will ever think of me as an architect. They refuse to think of me as an architect. Everyone believes that I was either a planner, but not an architect, or Bob's mate, or his office manager, or it's something that, anything at all, but an architect. And so she has had to fight to say, no, I did this for a project. I created the partie. I added this element. But even then they say, oh, yes, but Bob really did that. The photographs are unquestionably hers. Even she took them with her finger and her camera. A few of them were joint creations, but the vast majority were hers. And she understands not just about getting credit for self-aggrandizement, but she can say that they are wholly hers. They are entirely hers. And after a lifetime of fighting to be equally recognized, it is incredibly important to her to be able to say, I am an artist, I'm an architect, yes, 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 but you must put my name after this photograph because it is mine. And I think that that's both wonderful and sad, obviously. It's upsetting that having done so much, there's still a need to say, but I did something, please give me credit, to have to fight for that. And I think it's beautiful, beautiful, but also sad.
Yeah.
In a good way, sad, in a heartbreaking way,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carolina and Jeremy. I think, Carolina, you can...
Yes, I share my screen, if I can, yes. You see my screen?
Yes.
It's okay? Yes.
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 Okay, I'll speed quite because my images, this is I customized in a way, the presentation also of the exhibition last week at the Tyler, learning from Denise, not learning from Denise, learning to see Denise Scott Brown. And so I customized it for this event, and so it's really 15 minutes. But I speed. So I start with this image, as I told you before, because this morning there was this incredible, amazing lecture by Gilles Clement that you probably know, but he is a landscape artist, researcher, and writer. A really, really amazing artist. I think he's an artist. And he started to show, these images that I found so similar and so with a great affinity on what Denise was doing 50 years ago and what we are still handling today, in a way. And in this sense, I want to underline how Denise Scott Brown anticipate what we are still handling today. And in this sense, I want to underline how Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi, I consider them as pioneers in a certain sense. Now we can still learn from them very much. Sorry, I have to, yes. And so I like to be, I am a lot of things. Sorry, I want to add something related on what I showed before. I think they, of course, share the holistic perception and the interest in particular on unexpected aesthetic of use and the casual combination of systems in relation to the activity. So this is something that gathers them together, Gilles Clement and Denise Scott Brown. So I like to think I am a lot of things, explain the many sources of her work and theory, and explains also her circular vision among different experiences and cultures. If modern movement was selective, they started to be holistic. This change has been progressive, and they started an evolution from the ought to the is. In embryo, her photograph by Denise Scott Brown started to look in this direction. As we all know, and many of you probably, she has a very, very rich background with many places she lived and visited, and many encounters, starting from Africa, of her, where she was born in Africa and spent her youth, and then Europe, and then America. Her early African experience first raised the polarity of is and ought. Is, we intend the reality, and ought, we intend the ideal, or through the eye of an architect, what the discipline says about, what to do with the environment. And living in Africa, I think, gave her, this bright and direct perception of things, not filtered by Western traditional education. And this has to do of what we were talking about before with Jeremy, has to do with this innocence in a way, you know, the possibility to look directly at things. In London, I think that, at the Architectural Association where she went to study, university, there was the very important encounter with Allison and Peter Smithson, and Denise writes about, you know, that they shared both this outsider view for Denise, because she was an African in a certain sense, and outsider view having the advantage to be out of the traditional culture, which mostly established a distance between education and reality. But they also shared the mannerist attitude, the mannerism, as also Jeremy Tenenbaum was mentioning before, that is a tool, you know, to face and approaching the complexity of life, not only in terms of architecture, but also in terms of planning. So it's interesting and to understand, you know, how mannerism help to manage the coexistence of this different urban system in a way. And then there was, you know, in general, there was, when she arrived to America, there was the research of American identity. What was at debate was the form and the aesthetic of the contemporary city. And, you know, architects regarded the increased decentralization of the city with perplexity. And so the question was, what is the image of the city? And Denise's photo explained the evolution and the interest on the research of the American place. And I want to point out how also Harold Rosenberg, in the book The Tradition of the New, points out the great difficulty for the artist in America to find a point where to start. And so this was, you know, the environment they were facing in those years, in the 60s, and the very, you know, the sprawl in America. And the aim was to understand this new form of the city and evolve technique for its handling. At UPenn, she taught a very important seminar at UPenn. You know, of course, in the very early 60s, she met Bob Venturi, and she met also Herbert Gans, a sociologist, and with whom she shared the fact that, you know, was important to learn to match the art of architectural ideas with the ease of reality, evolving a design system from within rather than imposing one from above. And this seminar was also extremely important because it anticipated the dynamic topic of the city roadscape. And then, of course, the joint creativity with Bob Venturi. Both Bob Venturi and Denise Scott Brown arrived to the same conclusion with different education via different routes. And I insert here the mother's house because, as Denise Scott Brown, the mother's house contains in embryo everything they've done. So it has a pediment along the big facade as a mannerist, you know, way of positioning. And there is a little building with a big scale. There is a distorted symmetry, is original, but not in the modern sense of expressing the new, is classic and elemental as an archetype, but especially is, you know, they carried urbanism inside the building. Denise wrote that, you know, the path that arrives inside the house then, you know, enters and goes through the stair vertically to the chimney. And this is a great lesson. They were both interested in vernacular precedents that I scroll now very quickly, and how to understand that also vernacular precedents were important reference for their project. This is the fire station number 4 in Columbus, and the emblematic National Football Hall of Fame that, you know, is a kind of pure decorated shed, the building board, and as you can see on the right, you know, the Denise photograph of the billboard. But then, also Bob, in Complexity and Contradiction in the 1966, reacted to the idea of decay of cities and countryside by asking, is not Main Street almost right? And speaking about also the expatriate perspective, when he came back from Europe after 2 years of traveling and being at the American Academy, he said, from my part, I began to realize that the ordinary could become extraordinary. And this expatriate perspective, it fits perfectly also, I think, in Denise's perception of the environment. And then she started with, Los Angeles when she went to teach in the 1965 on the West Coast. She started to document the automobile city and the evolving outside city. Sometime I place also a photograph of contemporary photographer. This is Ivan Ban, and just to underline how, the research by image by Denise Scott Brown really anticipate what we are still working on today. And this again, the black and white photo by Ivan Ban and the colored photo by Denise. And how could they manage and how could they document this new form of the city? It was necessary to have new tools. And of course, Ed Ruscha was extremely influential in that period, in the early 60s, but also was extremely influential for Las Vegas. And so they start to be inspired also, by this kind of non-judgmental attitude, the rhetoric of objectivity, documentary touch, and depiction of reality. And so the Las Vegas Research Studio picked up cameras and treat architecture from the perspective of appearance and phenomenon to arrive to the theory of architectural communication. But also the words as subject, that is so important, was also something on which Ed Ruscha was working too. And here you see some works by Ruscha, and in the middle, a photo by Denise Scott Brown. And finally, they arrived to Las Vegas. Such a study, as they write, will help to define a new type of urban form emerging in America and Europe, the urban sprawl, radically different from what we have known, and come to understand this new form and to begin to evolve technique for its handling, stressing the is and the everyday. The first exploration happened in the 1966, and Denise invited her colleague from University of Pennsylvania to visit Las Vegas. After she was there, she went there several times. And in the 1968, they brought the students from Yale for the Las Vegas studio. The seminar was titled Learning from Las Vegas, or Form Analysis and Design Research. At the end of the seminar, the students changed the title to The Great Proletarian Cultural Locomotive. So, still inspired also by Ed Ruscha, this kind of objective description of the environment, they were questioning themselves, about the new tools and what new techniques were required to document these new forms. And Denise writes, we should aim to deadpan the material so that it speaks by itself. And from here, from Las Vegas, from the research on Las Vegas and the book, as we all know, came out, the concept of the directional space, where space, scale, speed, and symbol are related together. And of course, enormous sign in vast space and high speed. And every written word seen from the road, as shows the plan that is published in the book. And I want to underline the word every, that speaks about this deadpanning attitude of analysis and observation of that kind of environment. And I appreciate very much the definition by Martino Stirli of all this, heritage of photograph that we are, looking, are able to look, now on Denise, a thinking background expressed by photograph. And again, here I just recommended to look what today there, some really appreciated photographs are working with, and what Denise was doing many, many years ago, observing the landscape, the wild landscape, and then observing the landscape that when start to be inhabited and when, are used for work and life. And of course, the communication and the pop cultures also in Africa, she started to be interested in these aspects that then become, really so important to analyze and document American cities. And also the building cultures, as also Jeremy was showing before, MAPOC, or, vernacular architecture and housing in general, but also, the population, but the population in relation with the environment, with with their environment. And this is one image for all, of course. And really, it's amazing how, the trees are in a symbiotic relation with the women, with the arms of the women, to create, a whole. And then when she arrived in London, and she writes, I was impressed by a conference by Le Corbusier, where, a lesson on functionalism of that time, where among other issues, Le Corbusier invites to go behind buildings, where architects consider practicalities rather than aesthetic, and where you can find interesting things. And so Denise also start to make photographs, not so conventional, or also adding at conventional photo, really, really interesting photo of rears, of monuments from courtyards, and arriving to, document, of course, also the new brutalism of that was going on in that period, and but also the new brutalism inside the context. So the relation of different system and the collision of this different system. And of course, as Jeremy was saying, the vast space as she found in Africa, she refound it in other countries, of course, and also in Venice. This is a beautiful picture that shows Venice to Venice, the lagoon, and the activity, the pigeons, and the glamour, as Jeremy was saying before, but then the activity, and also the everyday life, but also detail, material, utilitarian elements, and the aesthetic of the use, I would say also. And also in Santa Monica, the activity, the juxtaposition, and going back to the seminar, form, forces, and function, she writes, the pulsating forces, social, technical, and natural of urban life are the great form givers of the city. And again, the surfers, and again, on the West Coast, Santa Monica, or Venice, no, I think it's Santa Monica, the decorated shed. And I add also an image of their project for the Allen Memorial Art Museum, where, that was designed just after the publication of Learning from Las Vegas, that shows how directly some inspiration, even in an unexpected way, can be, a memory of some documentation she done all over the environment. And so she started to analyze the roadscape. And again, here on the left, an image of Ivan Ban. So I'm really impressed by this, anticipation of this documentation, and impressed how her eyes could capture the real problem that we still are facing today. And then she arrived to Las Vegas, I think in the middle of nothing. And again, in Las Vegas, I like to look also to the conventional, the image that everyone knows, but also the rear in Las Vegas, the rear of the casino from the desert, and even Bob Venturi from the rear. and of course the strip. So at the question, what did we learn? This is a question they had to answer tons of time, and she answered what we learned would show in our subsequent work, but also what we learn is not to place neon signs on buildings or 2 + 2 = 4 on matte building, but rather to reassess the role of symbolism in architecture, and in the process to learn a new receptivity to the taste and values of other people, and a new modesty in our role of architects in society. But also they learn to go back to Rome, the famous statement from Rome to Las Vegas, and from Las Vegas to Rome. So to look at, this culture, European culture, with other eyes, and considering, the Roman inscription as communication, or considering the Gothic cathedral as a building board. And then just 2 words on the legacy, one example for all. On the legacy, for us European, these are projects by Herzog and de Meuron, and look at, the upper, simple ordinary shed that is decorated by nature, by a sliding, water that slides along the concrete wall, and really links, their work to the specific environment of Switzerland, where the mountains are so monumental and strong. And finally, thank you. Okay. So to come back, I have to do, sorry, what do I have to do? Oh, yes. No. Okay.
It's your turn now.
Yeah.
Okay. Too long? Sorry, was this too long?
No problem. Really interesting.
Sorry.
Jeremy.
So I thought of something that and I don't know if this is a question or a statement, but it's something that I'd made a connection while listening to you just now that I hadn't really thought of. I took 2 things that we often think about when we talk about Venturi, Scott Brown, Venturi, and I put together in a way that I was not thinking of them before. When you wrote that Bob Venturi wrote about the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Sure. And my question is, well, how do you do that? What's the process by which the ordinary becomes extraordinary? Of course, they had a great love for pop art, in which the ordinary would be represented in an artistic, exaggerated way. So one way is abstracting it into pop art. But the other ways you could do it are the way that Duchamp makes the ordinary extraordinary, by jamming it together, or simply by putting it on a pedestal. This is art now because it has a pedestal under it. And Bob Venturi and Denise Scott Brown understood that very well, that was something you could do to make the ordinary extraordinary. But then, of course, that's what Rouchet does too. Rouchet puts the camera and drives down the street, and suddenly the ordinary, and he does it in the deadpan way. He's not changing it in the process or making it into pop art. He's just showing it one after the other, and suddenly you have something extraordinary because it hasn't been seen that way, even though we all experience it that way. And then I realized, I thought through this process while listening to you very carefully, and I thought, why do so many people give Denise and Bob so much credit for having freed them from traditional architecture practices that had preceded them? After reading learning from Las Vegas, after reading Complexity and Contradiction, architect after architect said, "You allowed me to be free, to be freer than I was before."
Yeah.
And I think one argument is not that they obviously they didn't teach other architects how to design architecture. They what they really did was they presented this act of seeing itself as a freeing gesture. If you can see this way, then you're freed from having to see a different way, from having to do a different way, because suddenly you have your innocent eye. Suddenly you have that seeing itself as a kind of freeing act. And I love that. And that connects to what Denise Scott Brown is doing, because for her, photography is the act of seeing.
Yeah.
And that itself is a statement, is an action, is a, you know, a photograph is like a fingerprint of the conscious perception.
Yeah.
And it's a little mark left behind saying, I looked at this. I saw this with my own eye. And I love that that connects to their architecture and to what Bob said about the ordinary. I love that all of these things are not separate, but really components of the same.
Right. Yes, I agree completely, Jeremy. And, you know, it's a question of looking with new eyes also that is related with pop art strategies, let's call it like it is. So the decontextualization. But going back on what Bob, you know, the expatriate perspective is speaking about this. You miss for a while, you know, a certain context that is so familiar to you that you don't read it anymore. You go 2 years and more in Europe, you travel, you come back, and you have the possibility now to look at your context with new eyes and be more objective in a way, you know, and understand it with in that sense. But then I also, to the question of freedom, I think, you know, the postmodern thought, not the postmodern style, of course, the postmodern thought break all the chains in a way, you know. It was a circular thought, you know, philosophy, literature, and you know better than me, and so this, you know, and they were able to, I don't know, you say in Italian, the cavalcare l'onda, to be on the wave, you know, really directly to be on that wave, you know, they catch the wave before others in a way, you know. So I'm thinking about Learning from Las Vegas still now is considered the last important book on urban, you know, analysis. And of course also complexity and contradiction, and of course also all the essay, you know, having words, the collection of essays by Denise Scott Brown, and now the photographs speaks about this, you know, be pioneers, and I think that this is what we owe to them, you know, and we are still speaking and looking at this. And I just want to remember one very nice thing that I remember with Bob. I don't know, we were probably in Rome, and he was looking around, and so and said, okay, and looking also to a very marginal thing, and say, you know, I'm not afraid to say I like it. I'm not afraid to say I like something, you know, or I have to justify why. I just like it. I like also a thing that is ugly, you know, I'm not afraid. And so this is the freedom you were speaking about, Jeremy. That's it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that you know, I was impressed, and I invite you when you have the possibility to look also at this, because it has to do very much with Denise's photograph work. You can find it in the Architectural Association YouTube channel, the Gilles Clement lecture, because I think, Jeremy, you will be interested too. But what really they share is this unexpected aesthetic, you know, that comes from other cultures, subculture, and comes also from the use. And so, you know, the possibility, we can say the aesthetic of use, you know, in a way, the aesthetic of use in a certain sense that belongs to vernacular, you know, architectures. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I love that. I can't wait to look at that.
Yeah, you please, because it's fantastic, and I think also Denise should look at that.
I'll send it to her. Absolutely.
Yeah, she would love that. And I made a lot of screenshots, so I have you know, low resolution images to look at, because they are fantastic, and Denise would love that.
I'll send it to her later today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maria, do we have time? Should we keep talking? Are we done? Is this how long have we been talking?
It's beautiful learning you, the complicity, the empathy that you had. I think it is a very, very good conversation. So thank you very much. Really, I will simply to repeat some phrases, some concept that I think is very, very, very interesting. Different way to see. Can we love it or hate it? You can find yourself what you're looking for. the possibility to have your own position, shoots immediately, innocence. I think it's a concept that everyone has repeated. Look directly to the thing. Pioneer. I think that a lot of things, Carolina has said pioneer in a lot of occasions, is reality out ideal, urbanism inside the architecture. I think this is a very, very contemporary concept. I think that in the next conversation, we will talk about it, the urbanism inside architecture. Expatriate perspective, I think, which is related with the innocence. Document a new form of city, the directional space, patterns and activity as patterns. And so to conclude, the importance that for architects is really, really important, talk about morphology and topology. Talk about the form of the city and the relation between things and people, to understand the complexity of architecture and of urbanism.
This is what also form, forces, and function was speaking about the seminar, exactly.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know. I have a little question to conclude. I think in all the conversation we have talked about it, but I want to ask you one question to answer with the phrase or with the word. So, what is travel for Denise and what is photography for Denise? In a few words, you, Jeremy, and Carolina, to conclude this really beautiful conversation.
Carolina, would you like to go? I'm sorry.
Denise.
Yes.
It's a learning from. It's a learning from process from the beginning, and that, as Jeremy was saying at the beginning, he was saying, she used for projects, she used for teaching, she used for writing, and they come back, and then also the possibility of linking is so important. I think, she put a lot on this, and linking different cultures, find common grounds, find differences, and the possibility to have, all this iconographic heritage. I think it's a source. It's a source. Yes.
You, Jeremy.
I can answer with one word, but I need a few words first to explain that one word. Denise once told me a story of a French photographer, early 20th century, late 19th century, and I can't remember the name of the man, who said that he would take photographs by blinking his eye. Do you know this story, Carolina?
Oh no, the name Cartier-Bresson.
It wasn't Cartier-Bresson. No, it was some other. I know she loves Cartier-Bresson, but it was some other French, I think French, photographer who said that he could take a photograph by looking at a scene and blinking, and in that moment he would capture within his mind this image, and he would create a memory from what had been sight. And I think Denise, we could say learning from, absolutely. And I love the idea of learning as what she's doing. But in a sense, the one word I would use is reflection, because I think it's a little moment of time that allows her to look at a thing, to relate it to who she is, to other ideas that she's taken in the past. But it's that one little mental memory moment that she can keep with herself and look back to. She remembers her photographs, having taken them and not seen them for decades, because the act of taking it somehow has stored itself within her. So I really feel that for her, it's seeing, but it's a permanent seeing. It's a frozen moment of seeing.
Yeah.
And that's
fluid. There is a great continuity. It's a frozen moment of seeing. I agree.
It's one cell in a film. It's that one moment
right.
in a series of other moments that she's stringing together. And so it's both fluid but also static at the same time. Yes.
I appreciate very much what you're saying, because this was also for the exhibition, learning to see, what also something that we tried to work in this, huge amount of photograph, try to give the sense of continuity, because it's exactly what you're saying, try to different images, but we forced a little bit, to give the continuity with the description, but also with the relation among, the graphic of the photos together. So to underline exactly this.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you very much. I think
Thank you, Maria. Thank you,
Maria. So we can close this first meeting. We thank again our guests, Jeremy Tenenbaum, Carolina Vaccaro, and we look forward for the next session of genderless perspectives. We will create a relation between Denise Scott Brown, Lina Bobardi, and Lily Reich with other guests and speakers. So see you soon, and thank you very much, really, to stay with us.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you. Ciao. Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks a lot. Ciao. Ciao, ciao.